Christians in politics. How should Christians in the modern world approach politics? Now, back in when most of our scripture was written for the New Testament anyway, politics was not something that the general person could get really involved in. I mean, Roman citizens had a little bit, but it was an empire. It was an imperial. It was an imperial state, so there was no real, like, the people who were in power were the people who were in power. Period. The concept of being able to sway that, while it wasn't unheard of, because there were senators, but that was mostly landowners, and again, you were either born into it or not for the most part. What do we do in a modern context where anyone from any walk of life can become a politician, can get into politics? I mean, you could go run right now and become a state senator or a state house member.
Or a city council person.
Or a city council person. Or a select, depending on the town. Or a school board member. How do we approach that? Like, should we be involved? Should we not?
So, for scriptural context, there's a couple of examples. You got Paul. His involvement was with the judicial system.
Yep.
He was he used the court system to get to authority to be able to preach the gospel to him, to get an audience with authority to preach the gospel. That ultimately led to his demise. But
at that time, everything was going to lead to his demise eventually anyway. So
I'll give this to you for free. The mark of apostolic authority is suffering and persecution. If somebody calls themselves apostle and they're living in a big mansion and they're having they're living their best life,
they're not one.
Not feeling it. So, just give you that.
Plus, no new divine revelation, and
well, there's big A and small a, but that's the topic. I'm just throwing it out there that with great gifting usually comes great persecution, especially with prophetic gifting. And so, Paul's motive into getting into the court system, because he had a choice, and he decided to appeal something that he had basically won anyway, was to get an audience with greater and greater people of authority, and that led to him being killed, but it also led to him having an audience, and he was not the last person to do that in church history.
I mean, it ultimately turned into when the culmination of that was Constantine making Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire, and whether or not that was a good or bad thing, because absolute power corrupts absolutely, it still led to that over time.
But the guy who, just on a church history thing again, but the guy who kind of finalized what we have as our New Testament canon, he did all the work to kind of put that together. Marcus Aurelius killed him. So, the Roman Empire wasn't quite ready for it yet. So, and then 150 years later, there was a cross on the coin instead of Caesar. So, there was a remarkable change. And then I think we have an example of Israel in exile, where we had people who were put up as high-level bureaucrats, which had political power.
Well, I think we have a few examples of that, because we have Joseph. We have we have Joseph, and then in Babylon Nebuchadnezzar. Esther's a good example as well.
Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar is Israel in captivity.
Yeah, but he pulled
Daniel.
Daniel's another good example.
I always forget
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego,
which is not their names.
Yeah, I know.
That's the names they were given, which is an interesting thing, because that's how we know them. But they had Hebrew names too; those were their pagan names.
Yep.
And that's the names we all know them by.
And Daniel didn't take a pagan name, which is why he still had his Hebrew name.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think there's good examples of working in your position,
and having godly influence,
godly influence in those positions. And I think that it was Paul it was Christ who talked to the soldier, the Roman soldier, the centurion, and said, "No, do your job well."
Isn't that interesting?
Until your work comes into direct conflict with the Bible, do your job well, and then take a principled stand on the biblical topic. The challenge is, how do you make laws for a nation of 360 million people and try to sway things in that?
So I think that segues into my question, which is close to that, which is, in all the examples that I have, and you guys are free to come up with something if you have something different than I do. What I see, I don't know exactly what Paul's aims were. Did he want to convert did he want to use the emperor to push Christian values? Did he want the emperor to let off a little bit on Christians? Did he just want to speak to the biggest authority he could find? I probably should have researched that better, because I think that's an important part of this conversation.
I don't think we have any idea of the context of why Paul was going that route.
We just know that he was.
I don't recall any scripture that denotes intent.
I don't either.
So
if there's something out there and you guys know,
I don't have a great command or memorization of scripture. I actually suck at memorization, as everybody will find out. But I think the thing we take from Paul is, God has you where he wants you. Whatever position you're in, work on being the best you can in that position and finding opportunities to share your faith at the same time. And it's not about that it's not necessarily about that idea of going to the town square and preaching. Like, that's not everybody's call. That's not how everybody does it. Politics gets interesting in that, because if you are feeling called to politics, and I know some people who have been, there's some great people who have held high positions in government office, and I'm not going to name anybody that I know personally in that regard.
We'd like to bring some people on the show.
Eventually, yeah, we will probably bring some people on the show to talk about this type of stuff.
Both lobbyists and people who've held positions.
Yeah. But people that I know who have held higher office or appointed office or even elected office really push for more Christians in office. And that's mostly because if we have more people who are like-minded and have similar ideals and moral values, we can push laws in a direction that takes a more moral and principled stand. The challenge there are a lot of, going back to the, don't judge non-Christians, and the idea of free will. Well, our Constitution precludes us from going, the United States is a Christian nation. It prevents that entirely. So how do we operate how do we push a political agenda that doesn't go contrary to the Constitution while at the same time pushing moral values? And that's a hard struggle. So this is something that I've actually been struggling with for a while. I've resisted pretty heavily getting involved in politics in any significant way. Because, to be frank, I just don't care. Politics is very divorced from how I live my day-to-day, and I don't care what happens politically. It won't change how I live my life. Now, I also have this little bit of the worse things get, the faster Christ comes back. So I don't really want to have anything to do with it, because if I were, I would want to push it the other way. But that's a kind of selfish way to look at it.
Worse things get is a relative thing. So we had the early church who absolutely prospered spiritually under
absolutely.
Everybody hated them. Everybody.
And then they blew up as soon as they were and then they blew up faster when it was accepted by the entirety of the Roman Empire.
Then
so
the
that
Roman Empire accepts them and they start going into heresy. So and that creating church leadership structures that look like government structures, which some other things happen from that.
Sorry.
Was that a disagreement or
No.
an agreement? Yes.
No,
So we had a whole reformation about that, and so I'll throw the turd in the punch bowl on this. The evangelical church, which celebrates the Reformation, is gleefully embracing all of the wrong lessons from what the Roman Catholic Church did, in my opinion. They are using the government to push Christianity, which doesn't work, rather than influencing the people in the government. There's a difference there. Our hope comes from somebody else enforcing our rules.
Actually, I think a good example of this would be the Grahams. A good example of the right way to approach politics would be Billy Graham and his son Franklin Graham. They typically
This is great.
approach politics with, they'll give their opinion, but they persuade politicians on specific items, and they pray for them without reservation, and they have.
See, I could start a blog on what is Franklin Graham wrong about today.
Oh, I probably could too. Like, I'm not saying he's accurate. I'm saying their approach to politics was right. So, like, because Billy Graham, if I remember correct, he was one of the most. He was one who had prayed at inaugurations more than almost any other individual.
But see, I think that's the correct approach.
That's what I'm saying.
You're praying at the inauguration.
He did that. He went to the prayer breakfast. He did he interacted with people,
like
and
being the Senate chaplain or something like that.
He didn't push his agenda on the laws. He gave guidance, which I think is where more evangelicals need to go when it comes to politics.
So actually, I'm okay with pushing agenda on the laws.
I think in some regards.
There's Jesus didn't die to make us more moral.
Nope.
But laws are a reflection of society. And as Christians, we do have a certain morality. We do have a certain approach. The issue I see in our politics right now is that the laws we push have more to do with telling people not to do stuff than in telling people to do the things
I think
that
we're going to
Jesus
agree
told
on this
us
again.
to do.
Yeah,
right?
I think we're going to agree on this again. So I have this thing with when if Christians are going to get into politics, and I know there are people that I know who have been in politics who would disagree with me on this, but we as Christians should err on the side of pushing freedom, the ability to make choices rather than dictating outcomes or dictating action. That is the stance that I have on Christians in politics. We should always be on the side of allowing people, barring impacting other individuals negatively, the freedom to make choices of their own, because that's the only way that we preserve our ability to evangelize and we preserve our ability to have these conversations publicly and bring more people into the faith. Now, there are definitely issues where we should stand on one side and go, no, you should not be allowed to do that. But we should have a clearly defined reason why, and not just because God told me to. Because we're not convincing other Christians. We're not convincing people who have the same moral basis. And I do agree with not having your only defense of a reason why you're saying something because the Bible told me to. Well, that goes back to as a nation,
as really bad examples.
It can be, and it can be used in the wrong context.
The Bible can tell you to cut your concubine into 12 pieces after somebody's
you take
beat her to death and send it around the country to get everybody to come up and massacre 30,000 people. So there's an example that
may not be used in a good context.
While all Scripture is good for, I'm missing the word,
for teaching and rebuke.
Teaching and rebuke, that one may not be one that would have a practical application in our society.
What's the lesson?
Right. Obviously the lesson is to cut them up and send 12 pieces out to the 12 tribes and have them come in and kill 30,000 people. That's the only lesson you can really take from
That is very true on that case.
No, actually, there probably is.
The reasoning behind that is probably more important than the actions itself.
Yes, it is.
But and plus, we're also talking about instructions to a nation versus instructions to individuals.
And so I think because the Bible said, that's an illustration of because the Bible said might need a little more
context
for that.
And realistically, the only time because the Bible said will work, or because God said will work in a conversation with people, is if they agree on foundational principles of the Bible being truth. If you don't have that, that's not an argument you can do. Now, you could try, there's tactics that you can use to try to persuade people that direction, but you have to convince them that the Bible is true first in order for that to work. So you have to go that direction. And you're not, when you're dealing with lawmaking, you're not evangelizing. Like, that is not an evangelical activity. It is lawmaking. It's your job at that point. It's different. You have to approach it differently.
But in your conversations with those lawmakers, you can evangelize.
Exactly.
But that's
different than the
policy
lawmaking
position. So, so I have a personal belief that you do not. The lesser of two evils theory of saying this person is more likely to promote a policy position that I am in agreement with, despite the policy positions that they will do that I don't agree with. Therefore, I will lobby for that person, and I will try to get other people to support that person, and I will be on their team, and I will demonize anybody on the other team who opposes that person. I'm completely against. I used to be way on the other side of this.
So I don't agree with that you don't support the lesser of two evils. Unless you are going to provide an alternative.
Yes.
Supporting the lesser of two evils is probably the best option, because it takes us closer to where we need to go.
I'll just throw one caveat at you that Justin already alluded to. There's pretty much zero scriptural support for supporting the lesser of two evils or not supporting the lesser of two evils. We're in uncharted territory, because society is so different.
Yeah.
So
not only is it because society is so different, but it's also an area that wasn't important enough to give specific instruction on.
Yeah.
And this is
also
not
obey your leaders, but that's about it.
Yeah. Because at the time, which I said this at the beginning of this segment, we have capabilities of getting into politics now that we didn't have 2,000 years ago, or even 1,000 years ago, or even 500 years ago.
I was going to say, even 500.
It's been the last 300 years for the most part.
600 years ago when kings had to follow the same laws, and that was only in one country?
Yeah, pretty much.
And they weren't even that good at it after that?
They still sucked at it.
Yeah. Well, there was a document that said it, but
sure, because they listened to the Magna Carta,
which was revolutionary.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So.
And then it got basically torn up and trampled on.
Yeah.
But anyway, so my thoughts on that are, when you're looking at, and this isn't about being in politics, this is about, how we elect people. Look at your options, and unless you're going to provide a third option, pick one and support them, or abstain from it entirely and don't have a comment.
Yep.
Do not sit there and excuse the language, but do not sit there and bitch about something and then not do anything about it. That's one of the most irritating things I think anybody can do.
You're drawing the line
Huh?
at bitch?
Sorry.
I said you're drawing the line at bitch?
No, but whatever. But that idea of like complaining about something and then not doing anything about it. If you're not going to do anything about it, then don't complain about it. If you're looking at two politicians and going, which one do I vote for? Pick one that most closely resembles what you would like to see in office and support that individual. But have an opinion about it. Like, be able to articulate why. And as Christians, because people we're going through heroic leadership in our men's group right now, and one of the things that it talks about repeatedly is everyone's a leader all the time.
Good or bad.
Good or bad, everyone's a leader all the time. So you need to be able to articulate that leadership position, and you should. That's part of your responsibility as a human being, is to have a reason for what you're doing.
So would you campaign for the lesser of two evils?
I would say that if you're going to get involved in politics, yes. If you're going to be actively involved in politics, yes. If you're not going to be actively involved in politics, you have no reason to. But again, unless you're going to provide an alternative, the one thing I think we do wrong, and I'm a conservative by every stretch of imagination. One thing I think that we do wrong on the conservative side of the world is we do not provide good options when we campaign against something. We sit there and rail against something and then sit there and don't provide an alternative option.
But statistics prove that tactic works. So,
but it doesn't, because we're failing.
Politics it does.
But no, because like the left traditionally provides an option. Their thing is the thing conservatives are usually fighting against.
No, it's true.
But they're not.
Conservatives are generally obstructionist.
They're not positing another solution. They're not saying what the alternative is. They're just sitting there and going, no, I don't like that.
Yeah, the reactionary approach.
And it doesn't work. Because you're fighting against something. And fighting against something, instead of fighting for something, doesn't generate support. And we've seen that over the last 20 years.
I would argue that right now in our society that may not, at least from an electoral point of view, being rabidly against stuff is the only way to make it through the primaries.
Primaries are different.
In many
I think
constituencies.
I think primaries are, yes, except it would be better if they were for things that were opposite of what, or were alternatives to what the other
primaried out.
I don't think they would. I think we just haven't seen it. I think the only challenge to the primaries right now is actually who is in the primaries. I think it's an exception, not the rule.
Primaries are more led by anger than thought right now. So, and maybe have been for a long time. But it just seems to be the evidence. Maybe. I see who consistently keeps on winning in these primaries, and it's more and more wingnut, and they know it.
On both sides.
On both sides. I agree. Although, politically, I've always been able to depend on the Democrats to be more crazy than the Republicans, no matter what the Republicans do. And I would say in the last 6 years, that has not been the case, which will probably give me all kinds of crap from a lot of people. But they seem to be out crazy.
I'm not going to argue with that right now.
So it just, since he did his views as a conservative, I am what I refer to as a half-ass libertarian. I believe in more government than libertarians generally do. I don't believe the taxation is theft. I think it's a foundation of society and government. You actually have to have it. But I believe in a limited government. So my position on politicians is I hate them all equally. I didn't like our last president, and I don't like our current president. With about the sequel, yeah. So I hold my nose and vote every single time. So for the voting for lesser of two evils, that's all of them. Every single person. I never walk in like, yes, I can vote for this one. Like, it's rare for me to do that. Because they all believe in big government, and I don't. But that's from a government perspective. As a Christian perspective, who's a good man?
Yeah.
Who's somebody who...
so we haven't had that option.
You know, I mean, you can apply the... Paul's exhortation to Timothy on who should be an elder to your politicians. Do they handle their own life and family? Because if they don't, that might be a sign you don't want them leading your country or your town.
I think that is a great thing to look at. But again, if you're not going to provide an alternative, it's really hard to find. We haven't had those options. Like, we haven't had good options on the good man side or the good woman side. Not really.
Okay, I'm choking on this just saying it. But this is really hard. Carter and Obama were decent examples of people who were good people, whose policies I didn't necessarily agree with a lot of the time, but they held their families together. They were pretty much morally upright. I mean, Obama did some stupid stuff, but not on the level, say, Reagan did. And I like Reagan, but
I can't reasonably argue with that.
Yeah.
I can't reasonably argue with that.
But Carter also didn't see a despotic dictator who was a communist that he didn't like. He thought they were all victims. He had a completely, in my opinion, a completely wrong view of that.
So this is actually
supporting the Khmer Rouge and stuff like that.
So this is actually
awful.
where I could disagree with that. So I don't think it is the evidence of being a. I hate using the word good because no one is good, no, not one. But
definitely. So I cringed actually when I said good, but
yeah, but
word.
In the context of this conversation, I think it is appropriate to call out that the closest that you would get to good would not be somebody who would be mischaracterizing a dictator. So I think that throws Carter right out the window as an example for what you're talking about. Obama would be thrown out the window by how he handled managing our troops overseas. His policies are what led to his mentality of handling those types of items with Benghazi, with other incidents that occurred around the world, his indifference about those things, the lack of support for the police, the lack of support for our authority, our enforcement structures in the United States. Those aren't signs of good individual, like even approaching good.
Because even Biden comes out on you guys can't just get rid of the police. Are you crazy?
Biden said that, but then even with that, right? Then he leaves our allies in war zones with no backing whatsoever, and just rips them right out.
Same thing,
right? So these people,
I know somebody who's extremely angry at him over that.
While you have, when it comes to some of our other presidents, I'll go with Bush. The younger,
W.
He's closer to a good individual when it comes to those things than
I think so. I think that's a good example.
But even with him, right? He was a drunkard and had other challenges in that world. He potentially corrupt on the financial side. There's problems there. Talk about Trump. Well, how he handled policy, how he handled dictators, how he handled people bullying the U.S. around, it was hard and fast. No, I'll kick your butt. He had no problem taking that stance. But then you look at his personal life,
train wreck,
and it's a complete train wreck.
Yeah.
So we don't know president that we have had approaches that, but I think how they handle. I think it's more important to look at how they handle protection of the United States and its assets and its allies more than even looking at what their general policy positions are.
I'll throw out our current president. It's a clear example of putting your career before your family. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think he arguably tried, but and I'll just throw that out there to any pastors who are watching. You're in the same boat if you do the same thing.
Yep.
That's just how that goes.
Agreed.
And it's not just a politician thing.
You have to be careful with balance. Your family should come first. Now, a lot of the time, your family coming first means you need to work. Sorry, you need to focus on your job and do it well. But you can't do that while simultaneously completely neglecting your family.
Yeah.
There is a balance there that needs to be addressed. And to wrap up the Christian and politics side of this,
are we going to? Speaking of, are we going to wrap up the podcast on this one? Because I don't know that we have time to get into prosperity today. We're right at 9 o'clock. We can go late if we want to, but this is a good spot to stop.
Yeah, we could. Let's wrap up politics and we'll decide on that real quick. I think there isn't a wrong answer with whether or not you get involved in politics. But I think it's the same thing as what Christ said to the centurion, right? It's if you're going to do it to the best of your ability, do it like you're doing it to God, right? But you have to keep in mind what you're doing. And this is me. This is not script. I mean, I think I could probably come up with arguments to back this scripturally, but if you are going to get involved in politics, remember that you are not dealing with people who have the same base ideals and doctrines and theology as you. You're not ever going to deal with that. And you do need to compromise in government. So you need to give them something and they need to give you something. And that's how that works, because it's government. If you're taking on that job, remember that. That's the most important thing for you to keep in mind. Now, that doesn't mean you compromise your morals. That doesn't mean you compromise on things that are principled. But the things that are truly moral in government, that truly have a moral standing, just as an example, just so that we're kind of on the same page, any Christian politician who advocates against environmental protections isn't thinking about it correctly. We are supposed to be good stewards.
Absolutely.
So we should be doing something about environmental protection. How far we go?
If you want to lobby against the agency that has that name in it,
that's a different story. Or you want to restructure it. It's probably a better solution.
Because there's an implementation issue there.
But that's a conversation that you can have with, yes, I agree, we need to protect the environment. What does that look like? How does that function? Then you can start talking about the nuances of how we do it and how we balance that with regulation on businesses and people and those kinds of things. And you're not arguing about whether or not the climate is changing at X rate over time, whatever, right? You don't need to argue in that kind of context, and it's not necessarily a moral issue.
Well, I very much appreciate the EPA because I don't want to be afraid of the air I breathe and the water I drink.
That.
And I appreciate the Department of Agriculture because I don't want to be scared of the food I eat, and not everybody has the ability to know their farmer, right? So there's some, again, this is my half-assed libertarian stance.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are places for all
you
of
like
us.
Government regulation in moderation.
Now, is there abuse on that? Yes. Oh, yeah, because the Department of Agriculture made a bunch of rules that knocked out all of the small meat producers, and now we only have large meat producers in the country, and then they figured out that was a problem during COVID. So,
I don't know. My meat comes from the farm right down the street. So.
Yes. So you're one of the few small meat producers that there's actually a butcher, around the corner.
Yeah.
Do we want to bring up specific examples of Christians and politics? And I think we can do one in the judicial system and one. I'm thinking of one in the judicial system and one that went through politics. Well, actually went through the judicial system too. Both of them are judicial.
Sure. Let's do it.
I'm going to throw out one. So this one hasn't had as many eruptions recently because I think the people who are pushing this aren't doing it as much. But let's go over baking a cake for a gay wedding.
Yeah, okay.
And what should a Christian's response be to that?
It's up
biblically, and I think we can argue this one straight biblically.
Legal, or talking about the business owner's response?
Yeah, business owner's response.
So, I have two opinions on this.
Are they polar opposite of each other?
No, not quite. So I have a legal opinion, and legally, the concept of anti-discrimination at a federal level is unconstitutional. So there shouldn't be restrictions on how a business operates and who it serves.
Why is it unconstitutional? I know what I think, but
so it's a free speech violation. It's a
freedom of association.
Freedom of association. It falls squarely in First Amendment rights.
Compelled speech,
compelled action.
Because a cake is art,
right? Well, I wouldn't even necessarily say it's art. It depends on the type of cake. So what we're talking about specifically is making a wedding cake, which is art, because the decorations are art. And I think that falls squarely in First Amendment protections, which is actually why it was thrown out or why it was the Supreme Court backed the baker in this case.
No, there's been a few cases, but yeah.
In that,
yes,
I think we're talking
in
about
the Colorado
one.
case.
Yeah.
The Colorado case was especially egregious from the people who brought it, though. They set it up on
not
purpose
even
for
getting
that.
into that side of it.
Yeah.
Because that's from the perspective of the baker, of the business owner. So I've owned businesses. I don't currently operate one right now, but in doing that, we did have restrictions on who we would service for both moral and political reasons, actually. So anybody who would, because we were a consulting firm, our work directly impacted people's ability to operate their businesses and scale and increase their reach and their impact. We wouldn't service people who had different opinions than, not different, but antithetical to our faith. We just wouldn't. We would service people that we didn't fully agree with, but it wasn't an essential issue for us. We did that with a couple of nonprofits that we helped out, and those were good relationships for the most part. But I think from this particular case, the baker was absolutely within his right to not decorate that cake. Now, he would not have been in his right to not sell them that cake. There's a difference. If he just made the cake and frosted it with white buttercream frosting or threw a layer of fondant on it,
which was a common thing for him to do,
and handed that cake to them, and they could decorate it however they wanted to, or they could have somebody else come in and decorate it, or whatever, he should have done that, in my opinion. He should have also had the right to decide whether or not he did either of those two things, because freedom of association, and we have the right. Business owners typically, with few exceptions, have the right to refuse service to anyone they want. That is a right that they have.
Except it isn't.
Except it isn't because of anti-discrimination law.
There's two competing rights. What's our?
Ignore that. It's fine. It's an update.
Is everybody in on that? Oh, no, they're not.
Nobody can see that.
Yeah, I was going to say, we just move it a little ways over and block your head. But anyway.
Throw a cup at you. It's not this
You
one.
have one, but it's got coffee in it. So.
No, it's empty now. And it's
but you're like, but I like that cup. I wouldn't want to hurt that cup.
Exactly. Go ahead on your thought.
Yes. And I don't know exactly where the limits of this are, or if there are any limits to it, because Jesus picked a pretty extreme example. And he, in the society that Jesus was speaking to, they had an occupier that was despised. Now we're talking, the Jewish people at that time were openly bigoted to anybody who wasn't Jewish.
Yep.
And there's some amusing stories in the book of Acts about that. They were being occupied by people who they felt were desecrating their country in a religious way.
Yep.
Who followed on the heels of somebody who desecrated the temple by, they had the Maccabees went to war over somebody spreading sow urine in the temple.
Yep.
And this is the mentality that they had. And I think to them, the Romans were no different than the Ptolemies who preceded them that desecrated the temple on purpose. Hanukkah is all about the purification of the temple after that was happened. It's a big deal in Jewish culture. Huge deal that the Romans were there and were controlling their society. And it was a religious thing. It was against God. And it was a bigoted racist thing. So just can't overemphasize that. I probably already did.
Way beyond, yeah.
My wife's probably sitting there right now like, you did it again. Actually, she's playing with a baby right now. But Jesus said, if one of those soldiers asks you to carry a burden for them a mile,
go to.
Which is unjust as it can be, go to.
Yep.
So where is there a line for being compelled? Now, we're not compelled. We're sort of compelled. I mean, that the baker was in the place of being legally compelled to do that, right? Because the freedom of association was was overshadowed by the
anti-discrimination laws.
Yeah. And I'm not completely against the anti-discrimination laws, but that's another story. Yeah, it's not Christians in politics. Well, I hate them and they're necessary, and I don't know if they're the right answer.
I think
but
they
addressed a real problem.
I think that was the wrong way to address the problem.
Yeah. They addressed a real problem. Can we agree on that one?
There was a real problem to address.
Yes.
I will agree with that.
Okay. So, but that begs the question, would you provide services for a porn site if you were compelled to do it? Or would you...
If that became a thing where I was required to do that, I'd just close up shop.
Yeah.
Like, no.
You just can't.
Because
right?
I can't. And the idea of requiring a business to service anyone in any capacity that's inside of your purview, that's a can of worms that should not be opened. It should be left closed, and it should be within the business's right to refuse service for any reason at any time.
So this is kind of funny because statistically Christians are into porn.
Yeah.
But that's where we can draw a line that seems a little more important, right? So,
well, yeah, and I mean, like, so do I think there is ever a reason? Let me make sure that this is clear. Do I think that there is ever a reason to deny service based on race? No. Do I want there to be a law telling me that I'm not allowed to do that? No, I don't. Because me doing that really only hurts me.
But as a Christian, what is your response to?
As a Christian,
to carry a burden.
I think
because it was a big deal that Jesus said. It wasn't a casual thing, right?
No. Because I know that he was referring to the fact that a Roman soldier could ask anyone to carry something for them, and they were required by law to do it. And he was basically going, go above and beyond. Because yes, that makes sense. The act of doing that is not antithetical to something that is scripturally sinful. There is nothing about that compulsion that is sinful.
I'm not sure that the people he was talking to saw it that way.
Whether or not they did, even in the Old Testament and the Old Testament law, there was nothing sinful about the Romans doing that.
There's nothing that we interpret from the Old Testament law that says it, right? We're living in a society that had a little... Yes,
but you would have to...
Had some extra sensibilities.
Even with that, though, even looking at the Old Testament law, there is nothing that directly says, no, you can't do that.
I agree, but Peter, when he went to the Romans and witnessed to them, because he was told to 3 times, opened up with, I'm not even supposed to be in your house.
But he wasn't supposed to be in the house. It didn't mean he couldn't carry something for them. Yes, there is interpretive things that may be played into that. I think the point that I'm making is I think there's a major difference between something that is inherently sinful, that while people try to argue about it, I don't think you really have an argument for saying that the homosexual lifestyle is sinful. That requiring any individual to produce a product that is in support of something that is sinful is, I think, a very different case than carrying a Roman soldier's anything an extra mile. I think what we're talking, it's the difference of, so the Roman soldiers, if the Roman soldier asked you to trying to find I think the concept of the Roman soldier asking you to commit a sexual immoral act or any kind of sinful act would have not been something that Christ would have gone, do it double.
But the people asking for the cake weren't asking them to participate in an orgy. They were
they were asking for them to make a cake for an immoral act.
Yeah, and I don't even think that was in this particular case. I think that the cake, the art they were asking for on it,
I don't remember,
was was designed to be offensive to that person,
which is even more reason for this to be a thing.
They set him
right?
up. I mean, this was a test case set.
But right? I'm not like even ignoring that concept, right? It's really hard for me to come up with a situation where it would be okay to provide artwork for that creative process. That how do you delineate what is supporting that versus what is being tolerant of a non-Christian?
Yeah, here's your cake, put your own topper on it that has 2 men or 2 women, whatever the case may be.
And if it was a standard wedding cake and the only thing they had to do was put a topper on it, and the only thing you wouldn't do is put a topper on it, like that, I might be more apt to do that because you're just selling a cake at that point. Like there's nothing that's supporting. There's nothing that is directly supporting. Now you could go to the selling to them is directly supporting, but I'm not completely of that opinion because you're not. I mean, they're coming in and buying something from you that you provide as a service to anyone. Like so, that's harder to do. There's lines, and this is a really good example of let the Holy Spirit should be able to lead you, which is why I go back to there shouldn't be a law one way or the other, because the Holy Spirit should be able to lead the individual on where the right course of action is.
Because there's also a principle here. One, you don't judge people who aren't Christians. So, is it about you? All things are permissible. Paul lands on both sides of eating meat to idols in the same letter.
Sentence.
Well, not quite in the same sentence, but in the same letter. He does wait a few paragraphs or a couple pages before he brings it up again and does it this other way. And then John in Revelation is like, he curses one of the churches for eating meat offered up to idols. And I'm like, man, you and Paul need to have a talk. But so there's a kind of all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial.
Yeah.
So Jesus, I'm still going back to Jesus didn't die to make us more moral.
Yeah, agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
Morality will come out of it. We kind of covered the works thing at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
We don't judge non-Christians for a standard that they haven't agreed to.
Agreed.
You barely judge Christians for a standard they did agree to, right? So then you do, is there an opportunity where you're at to minister Christ's love to somebody? And I think that in this case, that opportunity should always be sought.
I agree with that, but looking at this from the perspective of the individual, so the baker, if his personal walk with Christ denotes that supporting that, sorry, excuse me, I'm very congested right now for some reason. His act of baking that cake is a de facto support of that, then he should not do that. Because while you may be able to witness to a couple whose lifestyle you disagree with, you have to make sure that you are not supporting what they are doing in making them think that it's okay. Because there is a difference between ministering to them and finding reasons to minister to them and finding reasons to show God's love to them and mistaking God's love for accepting what they are doing. And I think that's a problem that we have in modern evangelism today is we've gone so far in some churches to go, no, it's okay. You can, no matter what you're doing in your personal life, you can do anything in the church. Well, no.
I wonder how far you're going to get into this right now, because we're an hour and 20 minutes in.
I'm going to back off of it really fast, and we're going to do this another day.
I'm like, that's a whole episode.
But that's, because that is a whole episode.
Yeah.
But that's where I believe the baker was in his right to go, no, I can't make you a cake I can make you a cake. I cannot decorate it the way you
put
want.
this art on it.
I can make and sell you a cake because I will do that for anyone. But I cannot specifically decorate it for this event. And I think people need to be able to make that determination for themselves, because that's part of where are you in your walk? Because somebody else, another Christian baker down the street might go, yes, I have no reason to say no. So I'm going to just make it. I'm not directly supporting it. If somebody asked me directly, do I support their decisions and their lifestyle, I'd say no, but I am giving them a cake. It needs to be a personal decision. It needs to be able to be a personal decision, and the law shouldn't have anything to do with it. Nobody should be able to. No one who is not the government itself should be able to coerce action from somebody else.
Well, there's a whole lot still left to unpack on this one, and I didn't even get into the second one, but I think we're close enough to. Because we shouldn't go into do you want to do 2 hours? Because
I don't care.
Another one we can go on for a long time.
So I don't care. I don't think we go into any other topics. But if we want to finish up on this topic,
Christians,
then,
okay.
let's keep going.
I'm still going to go back to our mission is to seek and save the lost, not to fight for our rights.
Agreed.
Paul's mission in going to court for his rights was an evangelistic reason.
I don't disagree with that.
Because he could have stopped, and he chose not to.
Mm-hmm.
From the beginning, in that particular case in Colorado anyway, I don't know any of the actors involved. I know what the media was pushing on both sides, and on both sides it was about rights.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't, and this is really even a story about how we perceive these events. What I didn't get out of that was this guy being motivated by how do I show Christ's love in this situation. His motivation was how do I keep other people from being oppressed. Oppression in the church is an interesting thing because it usually grows it. So that's not necessarily a.
Well, I think there's a more fundamental challenge with this particular case, because it's not evangelistic in nature.
But it could have been.
Could it have been? So, but
if he made it, it could have been.
But
if he used that as a platform,
how do you turn
to preach Christ's love?
How, when you're talking about they're suing me for, like, realistically, right? Christ's love in this kind of a scenario would probably have represented itself in not fighting the case and
you think?
And backing off.
You think?
I don't see
it may not have been. There may be a different answer.
I just don't see that any other answer as being capable of being evangelistic, because at that point you're evangelizing to them. You're going, look, I'm sorry you're unhappy with that I wouldn't serve you, but that's my stance. I have nothing against you, but that's my stance. And if I have to close up shop because that's the way it's going to go, I have to close up shop because that's the way it's going to go. But I'm not going to change my principles because you don't agree with me. Like, I think that's the way in that kind of a circumstance that you could potentially evangelize. But I think the challenge and the tension here in this case is you've got a country that has a certain set of laws that up until that case has allowed for people to not provide people for almost any reason, and that was challenged. It was a legal challenge. It's harder to draw the line in this case because Paul was brought up on charges for evangelizing.
Yes, he was.
And that's a really easy case to make, because that's whatever you do here, Christ still wants you to turn to him. That's easier to do.
But he could have stopped that case.
He could have.
In front of Agrippa, he could have stopped it. I think it's Agrippa, if I got the right magistrate right.
He absolutely could have stopped that case and not gone any further, but it was worth pushing for an evangelistic purpose. I don't think there's as much of an evangelistic purpose for going, I can bake a cake for whoever I want.
So maybe. So I'm going to reference banter, which had absolutely nothing to do with anything that we had at the very beginning, which is interesting how this is coming around. But because I think you're constraining your creativity and you need to open up the bounds a little bit. So I'll give a scriptural example.
Go ahead.
Paul appealing that case put him in prison, which is why we're talking about Paul.
Yeah.
Because there just wouldn't have been the proliferation of letters. He went with what he had. You know, when he was free, he traveled and he spoke. But when he was in prison, he wrote, because that's what he had left, right? He had messengers coming back and forth telling him what to do, and he wrote more when he was in prison than he did when he wasn't in prison, because he had some time to do it. He just went with what he could. Okay, you put me in prison,
now I'm going to write.
I'm going to influence the next 2,000 years. I think a similar case can be made. So that case brought a lot of notoriety, and it was brought by the aggressor, who was the person asking him to make the cake. They were the aggressors in this situation. They set up the situation very intentionally. It's kind of like Rosa Parks sitting on the bus was not an accident, right? That was a setup.
Oh yeah,
they knew who she was. They had rejected earlier cases. They had one person. I think she was just too young and pretty, and so they didn't go with her because she wasn't sympathetic enough. You know, some things like that. I mean, there was a lot of strategy around that.
Yeah.
And so there's once you're in the news, you can hit all the talk shows. You can do anything you want. If your heart is toward evangelizing, if your heart is showing people the heart of Christ, you have the opportunity to do that. People will give you that platform.
Okay.
So they're even in that. And that may or may not have been how that worked out, but it's a way it could work out.
So I think I have to concede that you're right that it was a mishandled opportunity. I don't think the case itself could have been handled really any other way.
It probably wouldn't have been, no matter what.
But no, it could have. The heart of evangelism could have shown through in other venues surrounding the case that was generated because of the case. I think you're right there. I think, you're probably right that could have been handled.
If it's forced on you, so this is carrying the burden a mile, kind of thing. If it's forced on you, I mean, Jesus didn't say, why don't you try to convert the guy while you're doing it and bring him over to your side? But that is something you can do. The soldier's right there.
Yeah. Well, and that is true, and I think that would be a good case for that. And as I said,
and show them love all the way through
That is a good way to do that, but I don't think the parallel for is conceding and making the cake for them anyway.
And how many negotiations was he in, sitting across the table from these people, where he could speak the heart of Jesus to them? I mean, he had opportunity. I mean, in sales, we talk about how many touches you get, right?
Yeah.
How many touches does this guy have with a group that the church has a pretty bad history with, and he has the opportunity to get to know them on a personal level and say, yes, I can't do this, but I love you.
Let me argue. We don't know if he did or didn't.
We don't know. All we know is what the popular media has, and the popular media was that way because we all took sides that way.
I had seen some stories where he offered to make them a generic wedding cake, and he offered to do other things he wouldn't do what they specifically wanted, and that's what they brought the case for. Barring I don't know enough about the situation to talk about the specific situation, right. So I'm trying to talk in conceptual terms. The idea that you should be forced into a specific action, I think, is still wrong, and it was right for him to fight for that. I do agree with you that there were a lot of missed opportunities to evangelize and show Christ's love during that process.
Which he should, it may or may not get through the media, but I don't know. But I didn't see any examples of it. You'd think TBN would have picked it up or somebody like that.
I don't know.
What he was doing.
Fox would have probably picked it up if they had done that at that time. I don't know if they would now, but they would have then. So I think,
weirdly, as much as I despise Tucker Carlson, he's enough of a shill that he would have picked it up.
You only don't like him because he's too much like you. He's a troll.
He is such a troll. The thing is that I don't.
He's just a better troll.
I don't make a career out of saying things I don't believe. But he knew his audience well enough. He would have done.
Well, I was going to say, his show was supposed to be comedic, right? It was basically a comedy news hour.
You know what else? A lot of it was shot here in Maine.
Yeah.
I can't remember what town. It lives up down east somewhere, and they converted a barn into a studio for him. I had no idea until all this happened. And people in the town, they're like, we don't even watch the show. We just like him. We think he's a cool guy. So, so apparently in person, he's great.
Yeah.
So I can't judge that. I'm just like, come on. How do you make a career off of lying to people?
He's a better troll than you are.
How do you make a career off of lying to people?
He's a better troll than you are.
Yeah, I could, but I don't want to. So
you did.
Tucker, if you see this, come by and get on our show. Like he's gonna, but
Oh man, that would be awesome. We should totally try to do that. Mm-hmm. He's available right now.
Yeah, can we? Yeah, right. What else are you doing? We can run up to your studio even. It's okay. We don't mind driving. I just made a geographical reference. Nailed us down to the whole state. They'll get us down to our town sooner or later.
Yeah, whatever. Remember, we do not represent the views of anybody other than the two sitting right here.
Including the whole state of Maine.
Including the whole state of Maine. Because it's very blue right now. Anyway.
Well, it depends upon where you are.
It's very blue
north
right
of Augusta, the gradient starts
to
get red
10 people
quick.
That live up there?
Yes. All 10 people live north of Augusta. Yeah.
Anyway, so I think the gist is politics is a personal decision that if you're going to do it really well. And remember that you're arguing with people that do not have the same, like you have to make laws for people that do not agree with you. And you have to keep that in mind. And you have to show them love in that. And in my opinion, that's giving people more freedom than not.